with Donald Trump. There is no rest. He never takes a day off as far as perception-wise. We can discuss whether he works that hard, if it's really just a lot of oxygen and all of that. But he's constantly throwing stuff at the wall, making sure there's always something that he's controlling narrative-wise to try to do this. Every once in a while, he gets thrown off his game, right? Epstein threw him off his game for a bit this summer. But if you look back on Tuesday, we had that crazy Fidel Castro-like 3.5-hour seminar, right? Literally, this is not, and it gets at, I mean, I'm sort of being snarky about calling it, Fidel Castro used to give a speech and literally, he'd still be going after hour 3, hour 4. And that is Donald Trump, right? He almost exhausts the opposition, right? That's part of it. Throws so much at the wall, right? This cabinet meeting, obviously nothing got done, right? It was a 3.5-hour performance for everybody to pay tribute to dear leader. But it is a reminder how much he has changed the information ecosystem and perhaps the expectations, right? He does do one thing that I think's been a potential positive for the country, which is he brings everybody along on some arcane decisions so that there is suddenly more attention to sort of, he tries to do things like fire a Fed governor and all this stuff. And people get a quick civics lesson of, oh, no, the Federal Reserve is actually an independent agency. There's some laws that protect those folks. And here's why it was designed not to be politicized. So in some ways, it does at least give folks like myself, who I say, when it comes to political journalism, I think we need to spend as much time educating the public as we do sort of lecturing the public, right? I think letting them know, okay, he's doing this. There's a law here to protect us. Here's why there's a law. And you sort of teach a little bit of a history class, right? The last time, for instance, why is Fed independence so important? Well, and I've discussed this a few times, but I had Douglas Holtz-Eakin, who's been a longtime Republican-leaning economic advisor. I say Republican-leaning because data's data, but he was an advisor to John McCain, an advisor to Mitt Romney. He was when Republicans controlled the House in the early aughts, he was the person they put in charge of the Congressional Budget Office. So he certainly is associated with right of center economic policy. But he will tell you in the interview I did with him a couple of weeks ago in Newsphere, you can now go check out the Newsphere YouTube channel if you want to check it out. He was saying, look, if you want to understand what happens to a central bank when a politician gets too involved with it, in the present day, you just have to look to Turkey and Erdogan, who is in some ways might be a model for us. If you're wondering how does a democracy slip to sort of this sort of quasi-authoritarian, there's still a democracy, right? Nobody, the elections themselves haven't been rigged in Turkey, but he's kind of rigged all of government in his favor. And in many ways, if you're wondering where Trump wants to go, you can actually just go look at Turkey today, right? There's been this slow creep in Turkey of getting the government more involved, more nationalism, more socialism. Well, we're seeing similar things here, right? I mean, Donald Trump has embraced this sort of nationalistic socialism, whatever you want to call it. I mean, I know if a Democrat proposed a 10% stake in Intel, they'd be called a socialist. What are we supposed to call Donald Trump when he proposes to do this? I think the same word applies. It's a socialist. And there are some constitutional conservatives out there that are calling him just that. Eric Erickson has been pretty crystal clear on this. You've seen that. Steve Moore, who is a friendly Trump economic advisor, has referred to this as he noted in an interview with me, also for Newsphere. He said, who the first Democrat to praise what Trump was doing? Bernie Sanders. He pointed this out, right? So there is some, we've had this presidential embrace of socialism, and he wants to get more involved with the economy. He wants to get the government more involved, and that gets me to this Fed governor situation. He's now targeted. He realized targeting Powell impacted the markets. And the one thing we've all learned about Donald Trump and the economy right now is that the only way you can get him to back off is if the market's crater, right? Liberation Day, market's crater, he backs off. The threatening of Powell at different times, the markets have reacted badly and he's backed off. So now he's almost trying to test the premise. He'd love to fire Powell early. But at this point, he doesn't want to mess there. He realizes that there's almost an outsized reaction the markets would have to that. So what is he doing? And this is sort of what this Trump White House is, what they try to do is they try to surface up somebody you haven't heard of, who isn't a household name. Lisa Cook, not a household name. She's going to become one. And he's trying to basically test to see if he has this authority. This is a version of testing the electric fence, like in Jurassic Park, and he's testing the courts here, right? The Supreme Court already sort of warned him that while they are open to a growing aspect to executive power, that the Federal Reserve was a separate situation. There was a hint that there's a majority that doesn't agree with Donald Trump's assertion that he can do whatever the hell he wants with the Fed Board of Governors. Well, we're now going to have a test in the courts, right? There's no doubt that, and in some ways, this is the intentional act, if you will. They don't have cause because they have no indictment. There is no, there's just an accusation from a political appointee. There is no actual formal investigation. There's no grand jury indictment. There's no anything here because it doesn't sound like this is a prosecutable offense, even if whatever they're saying is true. But ultimately, he's just trying to test can he just sort of decide what cause is and do this? What is the extent? And so this is what the courts are going to test here. And if he wins here, then I think then he accelerates what he's trying to do, and he probably just fires Powell, and then he goes after all of these various independent agencies that we've had, and we've already seen the quasi-independent agencies that we thought were above politics, the FDA in particular, that's not going to be the case, that they are going to get politicized, and it's been interesting to watch the Democratic reaction on this. They've kind of struggled in the messaging here. Ultimately, they ought to be focused on, look what he's doing. Every time he messes with the economy, it gets worse. Every time he puts his hands into the economy, it gets worse, right? The price of eggs are going through the roof. The cost of living in general is going up. He keeps bringing up gas prices, right? Well, when gas prices go down, that's usually a sign that the economy is about to hit the crapper. Because economic activity is slowing in some way. So, low gas prices is not a sign of a healthy economy. And in fact, one of his, calling for lowering of interest rates is certainly not something you would do if you thought this was a healthy economy. If this economy were booming with all the job growth that Donald Trump claimed at his cabinet meeting, there'd be no calls to lower interest rates. There'd actually be, it might even be some calls to slightly raise interest rates or keep them steady, right? The whole point of the Fed sort of having this ability to go up or down is to try to prevent a recession. And it may be that because of tariffs, because of the high cost of living here, clearly there's a job slowdown, right? All of that data is, he can complain about the specific piece of August jobs data, but everything else that's coming out seems to confirm the general direction here. Job growth has slowed, and we may very well be in negative job growth territory.